Okay, having looked at lines, fills, and surfaces, now we can start looking at what things in ArchiCAD are actually made of, and generally speaking, that is building materials. The surface is basically just a skin that we use on the outer layer of these elements. It's this surface override in most element types. But the building materials, that's this sort of cut or material presence of things in ArchiCAD, is what graphically defines the floor plan appearance. You're looking at this composite, for example, with that pen set that we looked at, is why this looks like this wood pattern versus plywood pattern versus solid gray fill. And that's all controlled under the building materials here. The building materials are relatively simple. There are sub-attributes to them. So let's go ahead and reserve this so we can start clicking through some things. Generally speaking, in our template, we don't want to be adding a whole long list of building materials. It adds unnecessary complexity to the project. We really just need general materials. So for example, there is a wood siding material in here. If we have vertical siding, horizontal siding, various siding types, it can all use this building material. The generic or default surface for that becomes irrelevant because we have the surface overrides and the wall settings. We don't want to have 5, 6, 7, 10 different stone or tile types. It's enough to say that we've got concrete, for example. We don't need a board form concrete and a topping concrete or whatever, slab concrete. We can use the same concrete building material for the cut appearance of all things in ArchiCAD. This is where those pens that we were looking at get applied. This is why that concrete wall looks like this medium gray versus the wood framed wall, which looks like this light gray, because the pens are assigned to these building materials for the foreground and the background pen of these materials. It's why the wood siding, or the wood sheathing I should say, let's look at that right here, has that foreground pen that has this pattern to it. So this is where we get the ability to show these building materials as cut and looking the way that they do in floor plan and in section. Now the important thing about these building materials is this priority. This is the order that they intersect with each other. So if we look at, we have a slab here, for example, and if we look at a section through that slab, let's just go ahead and drop a section in here. Let's put it right here. This is what defines how walls react to each other, how slabs react to walls, how slabs react to each other. So for example, if this slab, well here the wall, for example, is running through that slab, and it's interacting this way because the building materials for the wall are higher than the surface, or sorry, the building material for the slab finish or for the ceiling. The slab ceiling here is running through, but it's being cropped off by that wall building material. And when we look at this with the documents pen set, we can see that we get that nice clean, the white fills, cut fills for the siding and sheathing, and then the ceiling board and the wall board all clean up nicely. The wall to floor framing cleans up nicely. We do get a line where that subfloor comes through because this building material is different from this building material, and it's going to create that separation. But we really want this graphically to be as close to our floor plan graphics as possible, where we are showing all of these walls cleaning up nice and evenly. Let's switch this back to the document pen set as well, right? So we're seeing these fills clean up in plan as well. So that's the idea with the building materials. Now these building materials get applied to composites and to complex profiles or custom profiles. I do want to take a look at the composites as part of this video as well. So the composites here are broken up by types. So we have these sort of divider attributes here. It's the old system in place of the layers, but it does define the groups of these composites. So we have ceilings, we have concrete composites, floor composites, roof, and wall composites. Each of these composite types is used with one of these 4 tools or multiple of these 4 tools. So walls, slabs, roofs, or shells. Limiting limiting which tools that particular composite is available to use with makes it easier to find the composite you're looking for when you're selecting from a long list of composites in that tool. The composite list does get to be a little bit overwhelming as projects develop, because we do end up with a lot of very specific composites. Even though the building materials for those composites may be very generic, tile, for example, we might have dozens of different tiles in the project, but the building material for that can be the same. But there might be different tile thicknesses, different grout thicknesses, different underlayment, different framing, and each condition gets its own unique wall. So these are really just kind of starting places for basic elements. If we look at creating a new composite, for example, we can create one from scratch, or we can create one by duplicating an existing. Duplicating the existing composite is going to be the easiest way to proceed with that. So if, for example, we had a concrete slab with a finish on top, we can select the slab here. We can say new, and let's say concrete slab 4-inch with, let's put wood floor. This is just sort of an example of something that might happen. So here I've got the pens already set up. I've got the building materials already set up. So these are the divider pens, the top pen right there. If you remember back talking about the pens, we mentioned that this core pen would be for concrete elements. So pen 64 is the top and the bottom pen of this skin in the composite settings. The gravel fill on the bottom, and then there is no under pen on this particular composite. That's been unchecked here. Additionally, there are definitions here for what type of pen is, or sorry, what type that layer of the composite is. That ties back into the partial structure display, so we can show as core, finish, or other. In this case, this is the core, it's the concrete slab. I can insert a skin, and it's going to automatically add one. So let's just, for example, look at if we had 2x sleepers, and then maybe a layer of plywood, and then a layer of wood flooring. So I'm going to add wood flooring as this top building material. I'm going to add sheathing as this intermediate layer, and I'm going to add framing as this layer. So that adds those in there automatically. I'm going to change this pen to this outside pen, so it's going to be a lighter pen. The end pen here is going to be that. Going back through and adjusting the rest of these pens, so the end pen on this one is going to again be this light wood framing composite pen, and we'll just carry that all the way up. Now the pen in between these two layers, because that's sort of more of a finish layer, we're going to make that disappear in our sections by turning that to pen 21, and then it'll only show up if we're using the detail pen set. Once that's done, we can define the thicknesses of these things. So we'll just change this to 1.5 inches for the sleepers, maybe 3/4 for the plywood, and 5/8 or 1 inch or whatever the finished floor is going to be. And there's our new composite. Now the concrete is defined as the core. So these other elements can be defined as other or finish. So this top one we'll say is finish. It did switch the concrete because you can't have a core, other core. The core has to all be grouped together. So this will be defined as the core, and the gravel is not a finished layer, so that's going to be other. I've set this to be defined with the slab, so we don't need to see this particular composite for walls, for roofs, or for shells. If it did have the possibility of being a sloped surface, we could apply this to roofs as well by switching it to roof. But in this case, because it's a wood floor, I can't think of a single instance that we would have a sloping wood floor. So we're just going to limit that to only use the slab tool. Once that's done, it's going to show up, let's uncheck that, it's going to show up as an available composite right here. It gives me the total thickness of that composite in its settings here, and that's fixed by the composite settings. Now, other things with the composites, it might be sort of, and I think we talked about this when we talked about the wall tool or the slab tool, but it might seem like we want to set this to concrete and just say that this is an 8-inch concrete wall. The problem with that, and it does look graphically right, but if we have a dozen different concrete walls in our project, or 100 or 1,000 different concrete walls in our project, and we find out that those concrete walls need to go from 8-inch to 10-inch, you're tasked with picking through every single instance of those concrete walls and changing them all in their thicknesses. So even if an element is just a basic extrusion like this, the advantage of using the composites is that, so here I changed it to a composite, it didn't change because it's the same size, but now I have a single point of control over that composite. So if I come into my 8-inch concrete wall and we find out that, yeah, this needs to be a 12-inch concrete wall, I can change it right here, and then globally, project-wide, every single wall that was using that composite changes now. You would only have a basic extrusion rather than a composite if it was sort of a one-off and you don't have multiple instances of that. So that's the composites, and really what we use to primarily apply those building materials is for composites on walls, slabs, roofs, and shell elements.